Welcome to She Has a PhD, the podcast where we celebrate extraordinary women in science. I'm your host, Inês Veiga. Today, I have the immense pleasure of being joined by Dr. Joanne Kamens, a truly inspirational and influential scientist and a distinguished leader in the field of diversity and inclusion. After receiving her PhD in genetics from Harvard Medical School, she has transitioned from academia to pharmaceuticals, biotech, and nonprofit organizations, having advocated for the presence of and success of women in science along the way. Joanne is the founder of Boston Chapter of the Association for Women in Science. Having been distinguished with plenty of recognitions such as the 2019 and 2020 Top 100 Women-Led Businesses in Massachusetts and the 2013 Pharma Voice 100 Most Inspiring Commanders and Chiefs, Joanne's remarkable achievements demonstrate her exceptional leadership and influence, as well as the contributions to her field. A mentor to many, Joanne has done numerous talks and trainings in companies and institutions, bringing a tangible light to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Continuing her work in her current role at Diversity North Group as a senior consultant, she believes training doesn't go anywhere if we don't make it a part of our everyday life. Let's start by getting to know Joanne better. Joanne, welcome to She Has a PhD. Could you please start briefly by telling us a little bit about yourself and what moves you?
Well, as you mentioned, I'm a scientist first, a molecular geneticist. I spent many years at the bench. I moved into leadership roles, and that was a bit of a decision, when you have too many people in your lab to be able to do the bench work. But it turns out I really like data. So I love analyzing data. So if I have a group generating data and I get to analyze it with them, that's very fun for me too. I haven't picked up a pipette in a while, but even now doing diversity work, I rely on data about things that work, about things that are effective, and to clarify the plight of people who are not treated equitably or fairly, especially in STEM and science. I live in Massachusetts. I've lived in the same house for almost 30 years. I have two kids who are both married and have kids of their own, so I'm a grandma. My husband is an aerospace engineer, so I'm married to a rocket scientist, so we have a very geeky household. And what I like crossword puzzles. I read a lot of books. I read about 100 books a year. I keep track on Goodreads if anybody wants to be my friend on Goodreads. I have other hobbies as well, but I like to keep busy.
Great, thank you. And as a woman with a PhD, as our podcast name implies, what led you to pursue a PhD?
Yeah, I think it was sort of like it faded for me. As a high school student, my parents are not scientists, and I went to a high school where I was one of the only people who left my state for college. So I didn't have a lot of guidance, but what I did have was, I think I was probably a biologist from like when I was a little kid. I got my first microscope when I was 9. And I was looking at pond water and things from the forest. And I was very good at math, which was very surprising to people because I was a girl. And in fact, I won a state math competition, and then I had to be examined by a battery of psychologists as to why a girl won the top position. They were so surprised that it was a girl that got that. And so being good in sciences and STEM, in those days, like, what did you do? You became a doctor. That's what my parents knew as like a career aspiration, a medical doctor. So I went to college thinking I was pre-med, but it took me about 2 classes to see that it was the genetics I was interested in. It was the basic research. It was the science. So I think probably from freshman year, I knew that was my aspiration. I also had fantastic mentors that drove me in that position. I had a very good undergraduate lab that I worked in almost all my time as an undergraduate. And the PI in that lab, Eric Weinberg at Penn, was just a great mentor to me, gentle and helpful. And I had great mentors in the lab, postdocs that helped me learn how to do science. And that drove me in that direction.
That's a great story. I know that you've become a mom early in your career and you were pregnant while you were defending your thesis. Many women today are afraid that becoming pregnant might hold their careers back. Is that your experience, or do you believe that having someone else to look out for inspired you to have even more ambition?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think you're so tired when you're a new parent. You're not thinking about ambition or, how you're going to impact their life. I do think that children that see their mothers having a respectful and equal career to all their parents, regardless of gender, helps them see themselves in those roles. And my kids are all super successful in their careers. And so I'm proud of them for that. I guess I was incredibly lucky, and I spend a lot of time helping scientists who have children not be lucky, but choose well. So when I was at Harvard, there was no parental leave policy or maternity policy. I would have probably not been paid if my advisor hadn't basically said, just go have the baby. We'll pay you. You can read papers at home while you're recuperating and enjoying your baby. He was fully supportive. I didn't know how lucky at the time. To me, that was just being a human being. How could you not support a woman having a baby? I didn't even understand the magnitude of that support that I got from him. I wouldn't have been able to afford to live if he hadn't paid me. I mean, like rent and food, like that's how we were living. So it was really just lucky that I had that support. I don't think that should be legal, allowed, okay in any way. I think that we want young women to procreate. We don't want it to be just people who don't have PhDs who procreate. We have to come up with a more supportive way of allowing everyone to be a full member of the scientific community. And that includes full support for the reasonable time to have a child and go through that experience and then be able to afford daycare. I'm a huge feminist about that. Should not. Do I think that, I did things differently because I had kids as far as the speed of my career? Perhaps. I mean, I guess what I see a lot is that women, I should be more careful in my language, is that people who have the child, who give birth to the child, take a step back in their career, and the other parent, the non-birth parent, perhaps surges forward. And that is what happens in some over 90% of two-parent, childbearing couples. What I would like to see is it be more equitable. So my spouse and I, we took turns with our careers. When I needed to slow things down a little, he maybe moved ahead a little faster, but then he would slow things down a little when I needed to move ahead a little faster. And so neither of our careers shot up. We stepped it up and took turns. And I think that was actively acknowledging that both of our careers were equally important. One of our careers did not take precedent for any reason. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of couples make. They assume that one person's career takes precedent, and that usually tends to be the non-birth parent's career that takes that precedent.
I agree 100%. I know that you are an advocate for that. And sometimes even us think that the first thing that comes to our minds is that the non-birth parent is the one that doesn't have to get up in the middle of the night and change the diapers. And we need to start thinking that it's both of the parents are parents, not just the mom.
Absolutely. And I would say in our family, both my kids have kids, so I can watch this happening. And the non-birth parents are fully involved in their rearing, including getting up in the night and all the things. The way my husband did that as well, did all the things. I think that that change is coming, I hope, and it's an equitable change that really needs to happen. Now, equally, workplaces need to be mindful of giving leeway to non-birth parents to support children rearing and growth, and be flexible around that. And I think we're starting to see earlier career, younger couples demanding that kind of equity and treatment. So
that's great. I also believe in that. I know that you have worked in academia, farm, biotech, and nonprofit. Most recently, your current role is the senior consultant at Diversity North Group. And I would like to know what has driven you to pivot your career in such different areas.
Yeah, so I haven't been asking how, to plan a career trajectory. I don't really plan. I didn't really plan anything. I sort of took opportunities as they came, and certainly my past experiences gave me all the foundation as I moved through my career. So, my experience in pharma allowed me to go into a biotech and manage a research team, and even to bridge into the business development. And then my business development experience in biotech gave me the experience to be the head of a company, because a lot of that work is business development, and my work on my science work and my work in nonprofit volunteerism was the foundation for me being able to lead Agene for a decade. And so I think each thing just led to the next. I will say that in all cases, it was my network. It was knowing people that gave me those opportunities. You hear it from senior leaders in every field all the time. Networking, whatever you want to call it, building relationships, knowing people, helping other people so that they have a reason to help you, is part of a huge part of career transition. And in my case, everything that I've done has been through connections. From my very first job in pharma, my graduate advisor knew people who knew people. He was on the board of a number of biotechs at the time. It was early days for biotech. And he's the one who got me the interviews that got me jobs. I don't know if everybody can say that about their principal investigator or their graduate mentor. He got me 3 interviews. I got 2 offers. I got 1 offer. I took that offer and worked there for 15 years. So it's all about who you know.
Yeah, the network is really important, and I know that in your case, it really made a difference for you. And I know that now at Diversity, you work closely with many organizations and startups in order to help them with inclusivity values, helping shape their leaders as well with their communication. Do you see yourself closing a gap from previous bad experiences you have had with past leaders?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I don't know if I, I am so lucky that I have not been, I'll say this myself, I have not been a direct victim of overt harassment, as in, specifically myself, quid pro quo, or any other sort of direct harassment. I have seen and observed a lot of harassment, and I have certainly had a lot of microaggressions and other, small, all those little things that add up, to hold, I have many, many stories about how being a woman in science affected my ability to advance, and changed my opportunities. And so I don't think and I have seen some very bad leaders, and I continue to see them that don't understand the importance of inclusion in their organizations. I myself have had mostly pretty good bosses. I've had a couple bosses that had some learning to do, I would say. I had one boss once ask me, "Are you sure that you want this promotion? Because, you do have 2 small kids. Maybe it's not a good time for you to be promoted." And, I just looked at him and said, "I don't think you just asked me that. That's not okay." And he said, "You're right. That's not okay. I didn't ask you that. Let's pretend I didn't ask you that." Um, and so that's just one example of the many small comments that people make, about and assumptions about bias about women in science. So I have many, many stories. I won't go into them all. Um, but it wasn't just one thing. For me, a lot of my work, especially around overt sexual harassment and bullying in the academic workplace, comes from talking with the targets themselves of that, the victims, the targets, the we don't like to say victims because it's not like they brought it on themselves. They're targeted by harassers. Um, and I talk with those people, and you cannot but be inspired to do something about it when you talk with the experiences of these people. Mostly women, but not all women. Bullying certainly can affect anyone. Sexual harassment is about 96% affects women, people who identify as women over other genders. Although we know that people who are non-binary or gender non-conforming, are suffering more and more as they bring their true selves to their work, in the academic sphere. So hearing those heartbreaking stories, I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with that still going on. And that drives me a lot to support, the people that are still experiencing it decades after we identified this as a problem.
That's great. And it's incredible to hear how that early passion evolved into your fulfilling career. Were there any women leaders who played a significant role in shaping your journey?
So many, but the fact is there weren't early in my career. I didn't come in contact with very many women leaders. There just weren't very many. There was one woman director at BASF when I started there in my first job out of graduate school. And she was supportive of my work. There were no other women leaders in the organization. They had all left. So, and the few women that there were in senior positions to me were always inspiring and helpful and supportive. I've had so many mentors and I've been inspired by so many women leaders over the years, knowing that they have to overcome a lot of hurdles to reach their positions, more hurdles than other people. And especially women who hold intersectional identities, so women who are brave to bring their full selves to their work. If you are from a racially underrepresented group and a woman, your issues and the issues you will face are even more than being a woman who identifies as white or, in that way. So I have been inspired by the success and the outspokenness of many, many women leaders. I couldn't count one of them. But I will say in the early years, there weren't very many. That's one reason that led me to found AWIS is I was seeking those leaders that looked like me to kind of it was before this was like a thing you could find on LinkedIn. In fact, the internet was different. It was hard for me to discover that the AWIS chapter in Boston had folded some years before, and to sort of get that restarted and make it the vibrant chapter that it is now, and supportive chapter. So yeah, I guess trying to fill that gap for women, it continues to be true. I still work occasionally in small companies where there will be only one person who identifies as a woman in the whole company. And that can be a challenge. Similarly, I will often work in organizations where there will be one person of color, one Black person, one person who's Latina, representation. And when they're the only one, that's very difficult. And so that continues to drive also the work that I do.
It's great to know that there's been a little bit of involvement, but unfortunately, there hasn't been as much as we would like to. And at least there's room for improvement. I think that you are one of the people that are helping this matter.
I
And
hope so.
yes, and you are a role model for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's amazing to hear how every decision has come to an impactful step in your journey, as if looking back, all the paths were destined to connect to the same destination. How was mentorship played for you, and do you believe it has been the driver for your career?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. That's kind of like my passionate, way to kind of drive positive change. I mean, we're fighting against a lot of negative things with policy. There's nothing but money and policy that's going to talk to stem the tide of harassment, especially in the academic sphere, in STEM, and that's hard to see. But we can support people through mentorship. And what I unfortunately saw was that a lot of people were like, "Oh, mentorship is stupid. It doesn't really work. I'm not going to think about that, right? It's not really helpful." But in fact, the reason why I got involved in learning about mentoring and starting mentoring programs and honing my thoughts on mentoring and resources is that it was one thing that was shown to really move the needle for underrepresented groups within their sphere. So good mentorship experiences can really make a difference. And so for the last couple decades, I've been very much involved. I've probably helped start over 100 mentoring programs in different organizations. I still do that work. I help kick it off. I have a handbook of how to start a group mentoring program. I'm a big fan of mentoring, and I like one-on-one mentoring as well. But I don't think that a stranger can match you in a program with a good one-on-one mentor. I think you have to choose your one-on-one mentors. It's to be someone that you jive with, sort of like dating. You can have coffee with the person, but for it to turn into an actual, more deeper mentoring relationship takes relationship, and that takes some time to build. So I really favor, when you have a program, an organized program, I favor a group mentoring approach, because that learning together as a group kind of does away with that mismatch effect of one-on-one matching. And it helps people learn how to be mentors and mentees and practice that in a sort of constructive setting. And then they will go off and find the one-on-one mentors that will drive their careers and drive their success. So to my mind, that's the most successful form of mentoring program. And I've helped start group mentoring programs all over the world, actually, which is really my most satisfying work, I would say.
Amazing. That's incredible. 100 groups, over 100 groups. That's really unattainable. This has been a great conversation. Now, for this episode, I think it's time for us to wrap up with the three lightning questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
First lightning question. What's the most memorable moment in your scientific career so far?
Yeah, I couldn't come up with a good lightning answer for that, but I will say that when past mentees of mine get in touch and say thank you and tell me how much my help meant to them and how it influenced their career and their choices and their success, every time that happens, it's a lightning moment. I love that. So always thank your mentors and tell them how things are going. They really appreciate it.
Second question. If you could give one piece of advice to aspiring female scientists, what would it be?
Make sure that you find peers to confide in about your troubles and the things you are going through. I meet a lot of women, people who identify as women who are scientists who are suffering from some situation in their labs and they don't find people to talk to about it. And that is a sure way for them not to succeed in their scientific career. So seek peer mentors, seek help and advice when you feel like something isn't going well in your career.
Great advice. And now for our final lightning question. Is there a remarkable woman leader in science you admire and think the world should know more about?
There is actually. So when I was a kid, everybody liked Jane Goodall and they liked Diane Fossey because there were no other women scientists. And so Leakey actually chose these women, 3 women, to study the apes because he thought that women would be better at it in getting to know them. As less threatening because he thought the apes and the chimps and the orangutans would be threatened by a male who studied them. So he chose Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey, but he also chose one less known person whose name is Beiruti Galdikas, and she still studies the orangutans in Bali and in other places where orangutans live. And she was one of my 3 sort of sheroes when I was a kid, and you don't hear about her very much. I actually got to meet her in person. And it was like an amazing moment for me. I think she probably didn't expect this adult woman to kind of come at her and be like, she's very unassuming. And there were other famous people in the room. And I was like, you are my hero. Will you sign my poster? Everybody should look her up. Beiruti Galdikas.
Great. That's a great answer. Thank you, Joanne, for sharing your story and experiences and for introducing us to an inspiring woman leader, you. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on She Has a PhD.
Thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate you doing this podcast for the women who need to hear from other role models and people working in science.
To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to She Has a PhD. Please consider subscribing to our podcast. We'll be back soon with more incredible stories of women's breaking barriers in science. Until then, stay curious, stay inspired, and never forget that you have the power to make an impact on the world.